The morning Hank Henderson found her collapsed in the snowdrift outside his cabin door. He thought the Montana winter had finally driven him to seeing things that were not there. He had been alone for 3 years in these mountains northwest of Kingfisher, and solitude did strange things to a man's mind. But the crimson blood staining the pristine white snow around her crumpled form told him this vision was terrifyingly real. He dropped the firewood he had been carrying and rushed to her side, his boots crunching through the fresh powder that had fallen during the night. The woman was barely conscious, her lips blue with cold, her dark hair matted with ice and snow. Her dress, torn and inadequate for the brutal Montana cold, clung to her thin frame. Without hesitation, Hank scooped her into his arms, shocked at how light she felt, and carried her inside his cabin. The warmth from his wood stove hit them both as he kicked the door closed behind him. He laid her on his bed, the only real piece of furniture in the sparse cabin besides a table, 2 chairs, and a trunk containing his few possessions. Her breathing was shallow, her skin dangerously pale. Hank had seen frostbite before, had lost a fellow ranch hand to exposure years ago, and he knew he had to work fast. He stripped away her frozen dress with clinical efficiency, trying not to think about propriety when her life hung in the balance. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then stoked the fire until the cabin grew almost uncomfortably warm. He heated water and carefully warmed her hands and feet, watching for the telltale signs of severe frostbite. Miraculously, her extremities seemed intact, though her skin was angry red in places. As he worked, he found himself studying her face. Even unconscious and half frozen, she was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. He guessed she was in her early 20s, with delicate features and long lashes that lay against her cheeks. A nasty bruise colored her left cheekbone purple and yellow, days old by the look of it. His jaw tightened. He had seen marks like that before on women fleeing bad situations. It took nearly an hour before her shivering began, which he knew was a good sign. Her body was warming enough to respond. He made broth from the rabbit he had been planning for his own dinner and managed to get a few spoonfuls past her lips. She swallowed reflexively, but did not wake. Hank pulled a chair beside the bed and settled in to watch over her. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall. He thanked God he had heard something that morning, some instinct that made him open the door earlier than usual. Another hour and she would have been buried in snow, frozen solid, another victim of the merciless Montana winter. Night fell and still she slept. Hank dozed in his chair, waking periodically to check on her, to add wood to the fire, to try to get more broth into her. Sometime near dawn on the second day, her eyes finally opened. They were green, the color of new grass in spring, and they stared at him with confusion and fear. She tried to sit up, realized she was naked beneath the blankets, and clutched them to her chest. "Easy now," Hank said softly, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "You are safe here. I found you in the snow outside my cabin. You were near frozen to death." She stared at him, her eyes darting around the cabin as if looking for threats or escape routes. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "About 15 miles northwest of Kingfisher, Montana. My name is Hank Henderson. This is my cabin." He kept his voice gentle, the way he used to talk to skittish horses. "What is your name?" She hesitated, and he could see her weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she said, Rose Emmett." "Well, Miss Emmett, you gave me quite a scare. How did you end up out in that storm?" Her face closed off immediately and she looked away. "I do not want to talk about it." Hank nodded slowly. "All right, that is your business, but you should know you are welcome to stay here as long as you need. The storm has not let up, and even if it had, you are in no condition to travel." My dress, she said, looking around. I had to remove it. You were soaked through and freezing. It is drying by the fire, though I am afraid it is in pretty poor shape. He stood and retrieved it, showing her the torn fabric. I can try to mend it if you like, though I am not much of a seamstress. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Thank you. For everything. I would have died out there. Probably, he agreed, seeing no point in softening the truth. Do you feel well enough to eat something more substantial? She nodded, and he set about making a proper breakfast of eggs from his chickens, bacon from his smokehouse, and bread he had baked 2 days prior. As he cooked, he felt her watching him. When he turned to hand her a plate, wrapping the blanket more securely around herself to free her hands, he caught her studying his face with an intensity that made him self-conscious. Hank knew he was not much to look at. He was 31 years old, weathered from years working cattle and living rough. His face was all hard angles and sun-darkened skin, his hair dark and perpetually in need of cutting, his jaw usually covered with several days of stubble. He was tall and lean, stronger than he looked from years of hard physical labor, but he had never been the kind of man women looked at twice. How long have you lived out here alone? Rose asked as she ate. He was pleased to see she had an appetite. 3 years, give or take. I used to work on a ranch down in the valley, but I saved my money and bought this land. Built this cabin myself. I run a few head of cattle, do some trapping, hunt game. It is a simple life, but it suits me. You not get lonely? The question caught him off guard. Sometimes, he admitted. But I prefer solitude to certain kinds of company. She seemed to understand the implication and nodded. They ate in silence for a few minutes before she said, I am sorry to impose on you like this. I will leave as soon as the storm clears. And go where? Hank asked gently. She had no answer for that. He watched her face crumple slightly, saw her fighting back tears, and felt something shift in his chest. He had been alone for so long, had convinced himself he preferred it that way, but something about this fragile, frightened woman made him want to protect her, to keep her safe. You do not have to leave, he said quietly. Not until you are ready. Not until you have somewhere safe to go. You do not know me, she whispered. You do not know what I might have done while I was out there. I do not care, he said, and meant it. All I know is that you needed help and I can give it. That is enough for me. Tears spilled down her cheeks then, and she set her plate aside with shaking hands. Hank fought the urge to comfort her physically, knowing she might not welcome his touch, especially from a strange man when she was in such a vulnerable state. Instead, he simply sat with her, letting her cry, offering silent support. When her tears subsided, she wiped her face with the edge of the blanket and took a shaky breath. My husband, she said finally. I was running from my husband. He brought me out west from St. Louis 6 months ago. Told me we were starting a new life. But he was a cruel man. He drank, and when he drank, he got mean. Hank felt his hands curl into fists. Did he do that to your face? She touched the fading bruise self-consciously and nodded. That and worse. 3 days ago, he came home drunk and angry about losing money in a card game. He said it was my fault, that I had brought him bad luck. He beat me worse than he ever had before. I thought he might kill me. So when he finally passed out, I took what little money I could find and ran. I had no plan, no destination. I just ran. I walked through the night trying to put distance between us. Then the storm hit. I got lost, kept walking because I knew if I stopped I would freeze. I must have collapsed. I do not remember much after that until I woke up here. Does he know where you went? I do not think so. I was careful not to take the road. I went cross-country, hoping he could not follow my tracks. The storm will have covered any tracks you left, Hank said, and he would have no reason to look this far out. Not many people even know this cabin exists. "You do not think he will find me?" Her voice was small, frightened. "Not here. You are safe here, Rose. I give you my word." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his heart beat faster. Trust, fragile and tentative, but there nonetheless. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because no one deserves to live in fear." The storm continued for 3 more days, and during that time, Rose slowly began to recover her strength. Hank slept on the floor near the fire, insisting she keep the bed. He lent her one of his shirts to wear, which hung nearly to her knees and made her look impossibly young and vulnerable. They talked during those long days while the wind howled outside. Rose told him about her life in St. Louis, how she had been an orphan raised by nuns, how she had met Daniel Emmett when he came through town with a cattle drive. He had been charming and attentive during their brief courtship, and she had been naive enough to believe his promises of a better life. The marriage had been good for the first few weeks, but the mask had quickly slipped once they were away from St. Louis, and she had no family or friends to turn to. Hank shared his own story in return. He had grown up on a small farm in Kansas, the youngest of 4 brothers. His parents had died of fever when he was 16, and his older brothers had divided up the farm and told him there was no share for him. He had drifted west, working various ranches, saving every penny he could. He had dreamed of having his own land, his own place where no one could tell him what to do or take away what was his. When he had finally saved enough, he had come to Montana and found this piece of land, remote and beautiful, and built his cabin with his own hands. "Have you ever been married?" Rose asked one evening as they sat by the fire. He was teaching her to play checkers with pieces he had carved from wood. "No, came close once when I was working down in the valley. There was a girl, daughter of the ranch owner. I thought maybe she cared for me, but it turned out she was just bored and I was convenient. When a real gentleman came through, someone with money and prospects, she dropped me like a hot coal." He shrugged as if it did not matter, but Rose saw the old hurt in his eyes. "She was a fool," Rose said quietly. Hank looked up, surprised. "How do you figure? Because you are a good man." "That is rarer than money or prospects." He felt warmth spread through his chest at her words, and he had to look away to hide how much they affected him. They continued their game in comfortable silence, and Hank found himself thinking that having company was not nearly as troublesome as he had convinced himself it would be. In fact, he was starting to dread the day when Rose would be well enough to leave, when he would be alone again with only his own thoughts for company. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Hank went outside to check on his animals and found the world transformed into a pristine white landscape that sparkled in the weak winter sunlight. The snow had drifted as high as his waist in places, and he knew it would be days before the paths were clear enough for easy travel. Part of him was glad for the excuse to keep Rose with him a little longer. When he returned to the cabin, his arms loaded with firewood, he found Rose attempting to mend her dress with a needle and thread she had found in his supplies. She had pulled on her own underthings, now dry, and one of his shirts over them for modesty. "How are your sewing skills?" she asked with a slight smile. "About as good as my checkers playing," he admitted, which made her laugh. The sound filled the cabin like music, and he realized it was the first time he had heard her laugh. He wanted to hear it again. "Perhaps I can be useful while I am here," she said. "To earn my keep. I can cook and clean, mend your clothes. The nuns taught me practical skills." "You do not have to earn anything," Hank protested. "You are my guest. Please," she said, and there was something in her eyes that made him understand. She needed to feel useful, to feel like she was contributing rather than being a burden. He recognized the pride in that, respected it. "All right," he agreed. "Though I warn you, I am pretty set in my ways. You might find me a difficult person to share space with." "More difficult than being beaten?" she asked quietly. "I think I can manage." That evening, Rose cooked dinner using the supplies in his larder, and Hank had to admit it was the best meal he had eaten in years. She had a way with simple ingredients that made them taste like something special. After they ate, she insisted on washing the dishes while he carved a new handle for his axe, which had cracked in the cold. As the days passed, and the snow slowly began to melt, they fell into a comfortable routine. Hank would go out each day to tend his cattle and check his trap lines, while Rose kept the cabin tidy and prepared meals. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking or playing games or simply enjoying each other's company in silence. Hank found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin each day, to seeing Rose's smile when he came through the door. She had started to bloom in the safety of the cabin, losing the haunted look that had shadowed her eyes when she first arrived. Her bruises faded and color returned to her cheeks. She was beautiful, and Hank found himself having to remind himself not to stare. For her part, Rose was discovering that not all men were like her husband. Hank was gentle and patient, never raising his voice, never making her feel afraid. He respected her space, never pushing for more than she was willing to share. He was hardworking and honest, and she found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, admiring the way he moved, the quiet confidence he had in his own abilities. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after she had arrived, Rose worked up the courage to ask the question that had been weighing on her mind. "How long can I stay here?" Hank looked up from the leather strap he was mending. "As long as you want. But surely you will want your cabin back, your privacy." "Your bed. I like having you here," he said honestly. "The cabin feels more like a home with you in it, and I am happy to sleep by the fire as long as you need the bed." "That is not fair to you," she protested. "It is your cabin, your bed." "Perhaps we could trade off, or I could make a pallet somewhere." "Rose." He set aside his work and looked at her seriously. "I mean what I say. You are welcome here for as long as you want to stay. If that is weeks or months or longer, it makes no difference to me. I have been alone for 3 years, and I think I forgot what it was like to have someone to talk to share meals with. You are not a burden. You are a blessing." Tears welled in her eyes. "How can you say that? I am married to another man. I am running from my vows, from my duty." "Your duty." Hank's voice took on an edge she had never heard before. "Rose, that man broke his vows the first time he raised his hand to you. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, a bond of love and respect. What he did to you was not marriage. It was cruelty. You do not owe him anything." "The church would not see it that way." "Then the church is wrong." He stood and moved closer to her but was careful not to crowd her. "Rose, look at me. You did nothing wrong. You survived. You escaped. That took tremendous courage. Do not let anyone, not the church or society or anyone else, make you feel ashamed for saving your own life." She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. This time, Hank did reach out, pulling her gently into his arms. She stiffened for just a moment before melting against his chest, and he held her while she cried, one hand stroking her hair soothingly. "You are safe," he murmured. "I promise you are safe." When her tears subsided, she pulled back slightly to look up at him. Their faces were inches apart, and Hank felt his breath catch. He could see gold flecks in her green eyes, could count each freckle on her nose. She was so beautiful it hurt to look at her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For saving my life, for giving me a place to stay, for making me feel human again." "You do not have to thank me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, I do." She reached up and touched his face gently, her fingers tracing along his jaw. You are a good man, Hank Henderson. The best man I have ever known. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, wanting this moment to last forever. But he was also aware of the impropriety of their situation, of the fact that she was technically married even if that marriage was a mockery. He took a step back, putting distance between them even though it was the last thing he wanted to do. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice strained. "It has been a long day." Rose looked hurt for a moment, but then nodded and moved toward the bed. Hank prepared his bedroll by the fire and lay down with his back to her, staring into the flames and trying not to think about how much he was coming to care for her, how much it was going to hurt when she eventually left. But Rose did not leave. Weeks turned into months, and winter gradually gave way to early spring. The snow melted, revealing the dead grass beneath, and the first green shoots began to push through the earth. Hank's cattle, which he had kept in a small barn during the worst of the winter, were able to graze again, and he began the hard work of preparing his small vegetable garden for planting. Rose helped with everything, proving herself capable and hardworking. She tended the chickens, collecting eggs each morning. She helped him repair the barn roof where winter had damaged it. She planted seeds in the garden, coaxing new life from the cold ground. The cabin had never been so clean or well organized, and Hank found himself amazed at how much easier life was with a partner. But it was more than just the practical help. It was the sound of her humming while she worked, the way she laughed at his bad jokes, the comfortable silences they could share without awkwardness. It was the way his heart lifted when he caught sight of her across the yard, the way her smile could warm him better than any fire. He was falling in love with her, and he knew it. But he also knew it was complicated. She was still legally married, and though she had heard nothing from Daniel Emmett in the months since she fled, that did not mean he had stopped looking. And even if he had, there was still the question of her feelings. Did she care for him, or was she simply grateful for his help? Did she stay because she wanted to, or because she had nowhere else to go? These questions haunted him through the lengthening days of spring. He tried to hide his feelings, to be nothing more than a friend and protector, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Every accidental touch sent electricity through him. Every smile she gave him made his heart race. He wanted to tell her how he felt, wanted to ask if she might feel the same, but he held back, afraid of ruining the fragile peace they had built together. One warm afternoon in April, as they worked together in the garden, Rose suddenly stood and stretched, arching her back. "It is such a beautiful day," she said, looking around at the mountains still capped with snow in the distance, at the endless blue sky above. "I had forgotten what spring felt like. I spent last spring trapped in that awful house in town, afraid to go outside where someone might see my bruises." Hank set down his hoe and looked at her. "You do not have to be afraid anymore. I know." She turned to face him, and there was something in her expression that made his pulse quicken. "Hank, I need to talk to you about something." "All right," he said cautiously. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "I have been thinking about my situation, about Daniel. I do not think he is looking for me anymore. If he were, he would have found some trace of me by now. I think he probably assumed I died in that storm or that I ran far away. Either way, I do not think he is coming." "That is good news," Hank said, not sure where she was going with this. "The thing is, I have also been thinking about my future. I cannot stay here forever living off your charity." His heart sank. "Rose, I told you, you are not living off charity. You earn your keep 10 times over. That is kind of you to say, but it is not true. This is your land, your cabin. I am just a guest." She twisted her hands together nervously. "I have been trying to figure out what to do, where to go. I could go back to St. Louis, I suppose, but I have nothing there." No family, no prospects. Or I could go to one of the bigger towns, try to find work as a seamstress or cook, though that would be difficult without references. I have even thought about going to one of the mission churches, though the idea of living that life again does not appeal to me. Or you could stay here, Hank said quietly. I cannot keep imposing on you. What if it was not imposing? What if it was something else? He turned to face her fully, and the words he had been holding back for months suddenly came tumbling out. Rose, these past months with you have been the best of my life. When I came out here, I thought I wanted solitude, but I was wrong. I was just afraid of being hurt again. But you have made me realize that being alone is not the same as being safe. It is just lonely. And I do not want to be lonely anymore. I want you to stay. Not as a guest, not out of charity, but as my partner. My wife, if you would have me. Rose stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. Hank, I am already married. In name only. To a man who broke every vow he made to you. Rose, I know this is sudden, and I know I am not much of a catch. I am just a cowboy with a small piece of land and a simple cabin. But I promise you, if you agree to be my wife, I will spend every day of my life making sure you feel safe and loved and valued. I will never raise my hand to you in anger. I will never make you afraid. I will be your partner in all things, your equal. And I will love you with everything I have for as long as I live. Tears streamed down Rose's face, but she was smiling. You love me, so much it terrifies me, he admitted. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you in the snow. Even when I thought you might be an angel my loneliness had conjured. And every day since then, I have loved you more. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful person I have ever known, and I would count myself blessed beyond measure if you would agree to be my wife. Rose let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she whispered against his ear. Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Hank. I have loved you for so long, but I thought you only saw me as an obligation, someone you were helping out of duty. Hank pulled back to look at her face, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. You love me, how could I not? You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me back my dignity. You treated me with kindness and respect when I had forgotten such things existed. You made me laugh again. You made me feel safe. And somewhere along the way, I realized I did not just love you for what you had done for me. I loved you for who you are. Your quiet strength, your gentleness, your integrity. I love everything about you. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was his first kiss, he realized with some embarrassment, and he hoped he was doing it right. But Rose kissed him back with an enthusiasm that suggested she did not mind his inexperience, her arms tightening around his neck as she pressed closer to him. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Hank rested his forehead against hers. We will have to figure out the legal aspects, he said practically, even as his heart soared. You are still married to Emmett in the eyes of the law. I know, Rose said, but I do not care. In my heart, those vows died the day he beat me. In every way that matters, I am free. And even if the law does not recognize our marriage right away, we can live as husband and wife. We are so remote here, no one needs to know our business. I want to do this properly, Hank insisted. You deserve a real wedding, a real marriage recognized by law and God. We will figure it out. Maybe we can petition for an annulment or divorce on grounds of abuse. It might take time, but we will make it happen. Rose nodded, then smiled mischievously. In the meantime, perhaps I could move from the bed to sleep beside the fire with you. I have felt guilty for months, keeping you from your own bed. Hank felt heat rise in his cheeks. Rose, I want to do this right. I want to wait until we are properly married before we share a bed as husband and wife. She looked at him with such tenderness it made his chest ache. You really are the best man I have ever known. Very well, we will wait. But perhaps I could at least kiss my intended husband from time to time. I think that could be arranged, he said, smiling, and kissed her again to prove it. The next weeks were some of the happiest of Hank's life. He and Rose continued to work side by side as before, but now there was a new understanding between them, a spoken acknowledgement of their feelings. They held hands while walking to check the cattle, stole kisses while working in the garden, spent evenings making plans for their future together. Hank made a trip into Kingfisher to consult with a lawyer about Rose's situation. The lawyer, a practical man named George Hartley, listened to their story and nodded thoughtfully. It is a complicated situation, he admitted. Divorce is difficult to obtain, even with evidence of abuse. However, given that Mrs. Emmett fled for her life and her husband has made no effort to find her or report her missing, we might be able to argue abandonment from both sides. Additionally, if we can prove he has given up searching for her, we might argue that the marriage has been effectively dissolved by mutual abandonment. It will take time, possibly a year or more, and it will not be cheap. I do not care about the cost, Hank said firmly. Whatever it takes. Hartley drew up the necessary papers, and Hank paid him a retainer from his carefully hoarded savings. It was money he had been setting aside to buy more cattle, to expand his small operation, but he had no regrets. Rose was worth more than any number of cattle. When he returned to the cabin and told Rose what the lawyer had said, she cried and kissed him and told him again how much she loved him. That night, as they sat by the fire, she asked, "When the divorce comes through, where should we get married?" "There is a small church in Kingfisher," Hank said. "Nothing fancy, but it would be official. Or if you prefer, we could have a simple ceremony here, just the two of us and whoever we need as witnesses." "I like the idea of being married here," Rose said thoughtfully. "This cabin is where my new life began. It seems fitting that our life together should begin here too." Summer came, bringing long days of sunshine and warm breezes. The garden flourished under their combined care, promising a good harvest. Hank's cattle grew fat on the abundant grass, and he was able to sell several head at a good price, replenishing his savings. Rose proved to have a gift for managing money, and together they made plans for how to improve the ranch over the coming years. They expanded the cabin that summer, adding a second room that would eventually serve as a bedroom, allowing them to turn the main room into a proper living and cooking space. Hank did most of the heavy work, but Rose helped where she could, and they both took pride in building their future home together. One evening in late July, as they rested after a long day of work on the cabin addition, a rider approached. Hank tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle he kept near the door. Rose went pale, and he knew she was thinking the same thing he was, Daniel Emmett. But as the rider drew closer, Hank relaxed slightly. It was George Hartley, the lawyer from town, and he was alone. He dismounted and tipped his hat to Rose, who stood nervously beside Hank. "Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Emmett," Hartley said formally. "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I have news I thought you would want to hear as soon as possible." "What is it?" Hank asked, his arm moving protectively around Rose's shoulders. "Daniel Emmett is dead," Hartley said bluntly. "Shot in a saloon fight 3 weeks ago in Wyoming. I received confirmation from the territorial marshal just this morning." Rose swayed, and Hank tightened his grip on her, steadying her. "He is really dead," she whispered. "Yes, madam, which means you are a widow, free to remarry without any legal complications. I took the liberty of drawing up the necessary documentation. Once you sign these papers acknowledging your widowhood, there is nothing stopping you from marrying Mr. Henderson whenever you choose." Rose began to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Hank thanked the lawyer, signed whatever papers needed signing, and saw him off before turning his full attention to Rose. He held her while she cried, understanding that these were complicated tears, a mixture of relief and grief, and the release of months of fear and tension. "I am not sad he is dead," she said when she could finally speak again. "That makes me a terrible person, does it not?" "No," Hank said firmly. "It makes you human. He hurt you terribly. You do not have to mourn him. I just keep thinking about all the time I wasted being afraid. And now he is gone and I am free, and it feels like a dream." "It is not a dream," Hank assured her. "You are free. We are free to build our life together without anything hanging over us." That night, for the first time, Rose asked if she could sleep beside Hank by the fire. Not to consummate their relationship, but simply to be held, to feel safe in his arms. He agreed, and they lay together on blankets by the fire, her head on his chest, his arms around her protectively. It was innocent and sweet, and Hank had never felt more content. They were married on a crisp September morning when the aspens were turning gold on the mountainsides. The minister from Kingfisher came out to the cabin along with George Hartley and his wife to serve as witnesses. Rose wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Hank had bought in town, simple but beautiful. Hank wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. They spoke their vows standing in front of the cabin they had built together, with the mountains rising behind them and the morning sun painting everything golden. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Hank kissed Rose with all the love and tenderness he felt, and he heard Mrs. Hartley sigh romantically. After the brief ceremony, they shared a simple meal with their guests before the small party made their way back to town, leaving Hank and Rose alone as husband and wife for the first time. "Mrs. Henderson," Hank said, testing out her new name. "How does that sound?" "Perfect," Rose said, smiling up at him. "Everything about this day is perfect. Everything about you is perfect." "I am far from perfect," he protested, but she stopped his words with a kiss. That night, they finally shared the bed in their new bedroom, and Hank discovered that making love to someone you truly loved was something sacred and profound. He was gentle and patient, and Rose responded with a passion that surprised and delighted them both. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Hank marveled at how his life had changed in less than a year. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," she replied, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "You are my home, Hank Henderson, my safe harbor, my everything." The years that followed were good ones, filled with hard work and quiet joy. They expanded their ranch gradually, buying more land, more cattle. Rose proved to have a head for business, and she helped Hank negotiate better prices for their beef. They became known in Kingfisher as honest, hard-working people, and they made friends among the other ranchers and townsfolk. Rose never forgot where she had come from, and she made a point of helping other women in bad situations when she could. She became an advocate for women's rights, speaking quietly but firmly about the need for better protections against domestic violence. Some people thought her scandalous, but many more respected her courage and her willingness to speak uncomfortable truths. In the spring of 1884, nearly 4 years after Rose had stumbled into Hank's life, she told him she was pregnant. He was overjoyed but also terrified, worried about her health, about the risks of childbirth so far from town. But Rose was strong, and when their son was born in late autumn, it was with the help of a midwife from town and relatively few complications. They named him Henry, after Hank's father, and from the moment Hank held his tiny son, he understood a new dimension of love. He had thought he could not love anyone more than he loved Rose, but little. Henry expanded his heart in ways he had not known possible. Rose was a natural mother, patient and nurturing, but also firm when needed. Hank loved watching her with their son, singing lullabies while she rocked him to sleep, teaching him his letters when he was old enough, always encouraging his curiosity about the world around them. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Ruth, and then 2 years after that, another son they called James. Their cabin grew to accommodate their expanding family, and what had started as a lonely cowboy's simple shelter became a warm, loving home filled with laughter and life. Hank continued to work hard, building their ranch into a successful operation, but he was always careful to make time for his family. He taught his sons to ride and rope, taught his daughter that she could do anything her brothers could do if she put her mind to it. He read to all of them in the evenings, stories of adventure and heroism, and he tried to instill in them the values he held dear: honesty, hard work, and kindness. Rose watched her children grow with a joy she had never imagined possible during those dark days with Daniel Emmett. Sometimes she would think about that terrible winter night when she had collapsed in the snow, convinced she was going to die, and she would marvel at how much her life had changed. She had gone from a terrified, battered woman with no hope for the future to a beloved wife and mother with a family she adored and a home she had helped build. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hank gave Rose a gift he had been working on in secret for months: a beautiful rocking chair he had carved from oak with intricate designs along the arms and back. She cried when she saw it, recognizing the hours of love and labor that had gone into its creation. "You have given me so much," she told him through her tears. "A home, a family, a life I never dreamed possible. How can I ever repay you? You already have," Hank said, pulling her into his arms while their children played nearby. "Every day I wake up with you beside me. Every time I hear your laugh, every moment I spend with you and our children, that is all the repayment I could ever need. You gave my life meaning, Rose. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me truly live." As the years continued to pass, their ranch prospered, and their children grew into fine young adults. Henry became a skilled rancher who eventually took over much of the day-to-day operations, allowing Hank and Rose to take things a bit easier as they aged. Ruth married a good man from a neighboring ranch, someone who treated her with the respect and love her parents had taught her to expect. James went to college back east, something that filled both Hank and Rose with pride, though they missed him terribly while he was gone. In their later years, Hank and Rose would sit together on the porch of their much-expanded home, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, holding hands as they had done for decades. They would talk about their lives, about their children and grandchildren, about the twists of fate that had brought them together. "You ever regret it?" Rose asked one evening when they were both in their 60s, her hair now silver and his face lined with age and decades of sun exposure. "Taking in a half-frozen stranger who brought nothing but complications into your life." Hank turned to look at her, and his eyes were still as warm and loving as they had been the day they married. "Not for a single moment. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. That winter brought me exactly what I needed, even though I did not know I needed it. You were my angel in the snow, Rose. You still are." She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. "And you were my salvation, my proof that good men still exist in this world. I shudder to think what would have become of me if I had not found your cabin that night." "But you did find it," Hank said, kissing the top of her head. "And I found you, and we built this life together. That is what matters." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear their grandchildren laughing as Ruth's family visited for supper. The sound of family, of love, of home. Hank squeezed Rose's hand gently. "I have been thinking," he said. "We should write down our story for the grandchildren so they know where they came from, so they understand that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the greatest blessings." Rose smiled. "I think that is a wonderful idea. We can work on it together, just like we have done everything else." And so they did. Over the following months, they wrote down their story, from that desperate winter night when a desperate woman stumbled through a blizzard to the lonely cowboy's cabin, to the rich, full life they had built together. They wrote about fear and courage, about love and redemption, about the power of kindness, and the importance of never giving up hope. Years later, when both Hank and Rose had passed peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, their children found that manuscript among their possessions. They read it with tears streaming down their faces, moved by their parents' story all over again. They had copies made and shared it with all their children and their children's children, so that the story would never be forgotten. The ranch that Hank and Rose built together remained in the family for generations, and the cabin where it all began, the simple structure Hank had built with his own hands where he had first nursed Rose back to life, was preserved as a reminder of where it all started. New generations of Hendersons would visit that cabin, would hear the story of the lonely cowboy and the desperate woman the winter brought to his door. And they would understand that sometimes the coldest winters bring the warmest blessings, that helping a stranger can change your entire life, and that true love, built on respect and kindness and genuine partnership, can transform two broken people into something stronger together than they ever could have been apart. The Montana mountains where Hank and Rose built their life together stand as tall and beautiful as ever, watching over the land where their love story unfolded. And though they are gone now, their legacy lives on in their descendants, in the values they instilled, in the proof that one act of kindness on a winter night can echo through generations. On winter nights when the snow falls thick and heavy, some say you can still feel their presence in that old cabin. Two souls who found each other when both needed it most, who built a love strong enough to weather any storm, who proved that angels come in many forms and sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest act of opening your door to someone in need. Their story is one of hope and healing, of second chances and finding home in unexpected places. It reminds us that we are strongest when we are kind, that love is worth fighting for, and that sometimes the person who saves our life is the one we end up saving in return. Hank and Rose Henderson lived full, rich lives surrounded by love and family. They faced challenges and hardships as all people do, but they faced them together, hand in hand, partners in every sense of the word. They raised children who knew they were loved and valued. They built a successful ranch that provided for their family and employed others who needed work. They contributed to their community and made the world around them just a little bit better for their presence in it. But most importantly, they loved each other with a depth and devotion that inspired everyone who knew them. Their marriage was not perfect because perfect marriages do not exist, but it was built on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine friendship, and a commitment to choosing each other every single day. Even when things were difficult, even when they disagreed or faced setbacks, they never forgot what had brought them together and what kept them together. The determination to build a life based on love rather than fear, partnership rather than control, joy rather than mere survival. As their grandchildren grew and had children of their own, they would ask to hear the story again and again. never tiring of the tale of how great-grandpa Hank found great-grandma Rose dying in the snow and brought her into his cabin. They would listen wide-eyed to the stories of how their love grew slowly from friendship and trust, how they worked side by side to build the ranch, how they overcame the obstacles in their path. And when those grandchildren grew into adults themselves, many of them carried forward the lessons Hank and Rose had taught through their example. They knew to treat their partners with respect and kindness. They understood that real strength meant protecting those who needed protection, not exploiting them. They learned that a life built on love and honest work, even if it was not glamorous or exciting, could be deeply fulfilling. The last words Hank spoke before he died, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, were to Rose, lying in bed beside him as she had been for over 50 years. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me," he whispered, his voice weak but full of love. "My angel in the snow. I will find you again, wherever we go next." Rose held his hand and kissed his weathered cheek. "And I will be waiting for you," she promised. "You saved my life in every way that matters. I love you, Hank Henderson. I will love you forever." He smiled at that, squeezed her hand one last time, and closed his eyes for the final time. Rose passed just 3 days later, her children said, from a broken heart, though the doctor called it natural causes. But everyone who knew them understood the truth. She had simply followed him to whatever came next, unable to bear being parted from the man who had been her partner, her love, her home. They were buried together on a hill overlooking their ranch, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, "Hank and Rose Henderson, together in life, together in eternity. Here lies proof that love conquers all." And so the story of the lonely cowboy and the desperate woman he saved from the snow became part of Henderson family lore, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. A story of hope and redemption and the transformative power of love. It reminded each generation that even in our darkest moments, help might be just around the corner. That kindness matters. That love is worth fighting for. And that sometimes the family we build is more important than the family we were born into. The winter that brought Rose to Hank's cabin door was brutal and unforgiving, but it also brought them each exactly what they needed most. A partner, a friend, a love that would sustain them through all the years to come. From that frozen night of desperation came warmth and joy and life, proving that even the coldest winters eventually give way to spring, and that new beginnings can arise from the most unlikely circumstances. Their story is a testament to resilience, to the human capacity for healing and growth, and to the truth that we are never truly alone as long as we are willing to open our hearts to one another. Hank and Rose Henderson lived and loved and left behind a legacy that continues to inspire all who hear their story. A reminder that love built on respect and genuine care is the strongest force in the world, capable of healing old wounds and creating new possibilities. And so their story ends not with sadness but with celebration, not with loss but with gratitude for a love that enriched not just 2 lives but countless others who were touched by their kindness, their devotion, and their unwavering commitment to building a life together based on the best parts of human nature. Compassion, loyalty, and love that endures through all seasons, all challenges, all the years of a lifetime well lived and deeply shared.